please call roll?
I will. Commissioner Graham?
Here.
Commissioner Hutton?
Here.
Commissioner Skinner? Councilperson Smith?
Present.
Commissioner Slavic? Commissioner Hanna? Commissioner Rigo?
Present.
Commissioner Gibb Randall?
Here.
Commissioner Mursky?
Here.
Commissioner Needham?
Here.
Commissioner Morocco? Councilperson Bannister?
Here.
You have a quorum.
Excellent. We have a draft of tonight's agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to the agenda?
I'd like to add an update on the Energy Commission meeting as the liaison. That's not on the agenda, I don't think.
You're right, it's not.
Should be a standing agenda item.
Yeah,
Yep.
it just fell off this week.
Yep.
From committees and chair.
Yeah, but that's not other commissions. But are there any other corrections or additions? Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Graham, Commissioner Smith, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The agenda is approved as amended. We also have a draft of the minutes from the January 25th meeting. Are there any corrections or questions about the meeting minutes? All right. Is there a motion to approve the January minutes?
So moved.
Commissioner Graham, is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Mursky, all in favor?
Aye.
All right. The January minutes stand as approved. Is there anyone here tonight for public comment?
Hello, my name is Edward Vilmetti. I live in the 4th Ward. My water bill is not always very high, except that one year where I had a toilet running in the basement for a number of days, and it was high then. I'm here to talk about your agenda item on the water and wastewater cost of service and rate design study, and point out some deficiencies which I hope will be addressed tonight in the information that's been shared with the public about the changes to rates. One thing you notice when as the rates change is that they're going up pretty much for everyone, not universally for everyone, but generally rates are going up. And in the face of a construction budget at the water plant, that seems a perfectly reasonable expectation to have. The question is to how this increase is going to be allocated and what's going to be the effect on people who have the bulk of the increase in rates. The rate increase is designed to be mostly a flat rate increase for those whose rates are going up, unless you're living in a single-family home. If you do live in a single-family home, there's a tiered structure. The tiers that are currently in place are 3 tiers. There's a new 4th tier added. I should probably say there's a new 4th tier added because it's considerably more than the current 3rd tier and considerably more even than the previous 4th tiers. And I worry about homeowners who are going to be paying those rates. The planned budget as seen in the things that I've seen call for about a quarter of the revenue coming from that highest rate tier. And I have to wonder 3 things. One, will there be knowledge given to people who are in this top tier, warning them of the projected increase in rates? The presentations I've seen only top out at the sort of 75 percentile, but there's a 90 percentile user who's going to see this the worst. I wonder how those people's behavior will change, whether they'll use less water and thus call our budget expectations into question. And I wonder who are these people who are going to pay the most money? Are they people like me, sometimes with toilets leaking in the basement? Do they have enormous homes? Are they growing tomatoes? You know, like what is the characteristics of that? And I don't think we know that yet. Thank you.
Thank you.
name's Dave Deepice, and I'm also going to speak to the cost of service study that you're going to hear about tonight. There's no question we need to provide enough money to support our infrastructure, but there's a couple things that nagged me about what information will be coming out about this cost of service study, and I'll share those with you. The first is when you get to slide 22 of the presentation, which is a comparison with other cities. There's 14 other cities that we're comparing ourselves with at a use of 18 units. However, only 3 of those cities have a tiered rate. And of those 3 tiered rates, one of them is a declining tier, meaning the more water you use, the less you pay per unit. So to me, that's a little bit like comparing apples and oranges. I think we should have a better understanding of, what percentage of people in Ann Arbor are going to be paying a much lower rate and what percentage will be paying a higher rate. Probably the people in Ann Arbor that are at the lowest tier are paying some of the lowest rates in the state, whereas in the highest tier, they're going to be paying some of the most expensive water rates in the state. And be interested to know what those percentages of people are. And beyond the comparison, I think we need to figure out who we should be comparing ourselves with. A lot of those cities are out of state. They're subject to different laws and different standards than the state of Michigan. It seems like we should be comparing ourselves to the state of Michigan more. Second is a new class of customers created in this, multifamily. There's about 5,000 commercial customers in Ann Arbor, and we're going to break that out into 2,500. And to me, that's a little artificial. Why suddenly do we need to create a class for multifamilies? And why not we have 24,000 single-family residences in our city? Why don't we look at which ones are subject to the household exemption and which ones are, don't have that household exemption tax? Or even, why don't we separate out, say, sporting facilities where we have event buildings or pools that might have different rates of use that would require a different tier in our classes. And the other thing is, I don't know if you're going to hear about what a definition of a multifamily home is tonight, and that's one thing that bothers me is our university dormitory is going to be considered a multifamily residential building, because the multifamily is going to get a much lower rate than the single-family houses in Ann Arbor. And that kind of bothers me a little bit, that we are going to be giving a discount to the University of Michigan that pays no property taxes in Ann Arbor, and now we're giving a discount on their water rate as well. There's other potential. May I have more time or not?
You can finish your sentence.
Pardon me?
You may finish your sentence, yes.
In addition, there's other university buildings. We're getting rid of a peaking factor in commercial units, as well as reducing the amount of fee for the size of the meter. Some percentage of university buildings must be fitting into that category, and they, again, will be getting a discount that doesn't, although the law may require it, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of justice there. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there others for public comment? I have to apologize. I was a little late running in and flustered, and I forgot that I wanted to make an amendment to the agenda, so I'd like to back up and do that. I have 2 resolutions that I would like to add. One is a second resolution addressing the water rates, and the second is a resolution for allocating money to spend on education and outreach for organics. And I know we have 2 more people who came in. May I ask again if you will approve the agenda as amended? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioner Grant, Commissioner Mursky, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. My apologies again. Now we can move on to new business. We have a water rate presentation from Stantec, and thank you very much for coming.
Oh, absolutely. So thank you so much for the time this evening, Commissioners. My name is Kyle Stevens. I'm a senior consultant with Stantec, and I was heavily involved in this year's study. And so I'd like to share those findings with you this evening. The first slide I've got up here is the organizational structure for the rate study. It was organized into 4 distinct components that built upon each other. Phase 1 of the study was concerned with how much it costs to run the system. What are the dollars that we need on an annual basis in order to keep water flowing? Capital, debt service, operating type costs. The second phase of the study built upon that, looked at how the system was utilized and was concerned with the equity and how do we recover revenue from different rate classes in an equitable way that comports with the legal environment in Michigan. And phase 3 of the study is the actual rate implementation. This is where we look at the current rates that we have in the city of Ann Arbor, look at the best industry practices out there, and look to make any changes that would enhance the inherent equity of the rate structure. And in phase 4 is to conduct any fee or policy reviews related to water rates or sewer rates. Jumping right into it, so the foundational elements of the study this year project the full cost to serve. So we developed a model for the beneficial use of the city ongoing after the study as well that looked at a 20-year time horizon and tried to project out all of the operating costs, debt service, capital costs, so we could get a full understanding of the rate trajectory on a go-forward basis. In addition, we wanted to evaluate the water sewer cost allocation, rate design, and then the impact on customers in the community. And a big tenet of the particular study here, and I'll go over that in a second, was really getting the community engaged. We made a large effort along the entire study to get outreach, solicit feedback, and understand really customers' concerns and ratepayers' concerns so that we could bring those into the study. And I mentioned in the first part of it, we did develop a dynamic model that the city plans to use on an ongoing basis to update costs as they change, update CIB projects, and look at the potential different scenarios and impacts on rates. So public engagement, June 17, we put out a survey. We got some really good feedback on this. So we had over 600 respondents, and I think even associated with that about 200 fill-in comments where we got some really detailed responses and thoughts from customers, so very helpful. Additionally, we did some focus groups, and throughout the entire process, we had an advisory committee that was comprised of a real good cross-section of customers. So we had single-family residential customers there, HOAs, commercial establishments, NGOs. And so a very good sounding board for us to, as the study evolved, to bounce our findings off of, get their thoughts. And so if we start with the first process, what does it cost us to fill a glass of water? It's a little graphic we've just created to think about the revenue requirement a little bit differently. So the first part of it is operations and maintenance. This is the day-to-day activity, the people turning wrenches to keep the water flowing, if you will. In addition to that, we also have about $10 million on an annualized basis that goes into the ground. It's capital projects, into plants, to pipes, to distribution systems. On top of that, for the assets that we have used leverage or financed over time, we have some debt repayment in that as well. On the water side, that's about $4 million. If we look at the cost to drain a tub, so on the sewer side of the equation, again, we have operational costs of a very similar magnitude, about $18 million on the wastewater side. Capital costs, again, similar size system, similar needs on an annual basis, and then some debt service, about $7 million on that side of the equation. Rate classifications. So in Ann Arbor, currently, there are 3 primary rate classifications. That would be residential customers, commercial, and water-only customers. During the process of this rate study, there were some findings, some data that was made available to us through the use of AMI. AMI is automated meter infrastructure. The city of Ann Arbor was a very early adopter of this technology. It's been in place for about 10 years here. Essentially allows us to collect a lot more data about customers and their particular usage patterns. And so this data was brought and became a key component of this study to understand exactly how your customers are using the system and how we should think about rate classifications. And so through that process, we were able to look at that data, and we're going to recommend at the end of this study a classification of multifamily customers be created. We were able to define that through usage and also bring in several other data sets. There was one with regards to rental properties and understanding exactly who are the various different multifamily customers out of the larger commercial category, which is roughly 500 customers. What's really key here, I've got a graphic up here. With the AMI data, we were able to understand customers' usage patterns. And so a water system, any water system, yours in particular, is created, invested in to provide water 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And that's regardless of that usage on that particular day. By pulling out this usage, what we can see, though, is that that system has to be sized to meet your maximum needs. The maximum day, which in your particular system occurs in the later month of July. I've got the customer classes here broken out on this graphic, and what I want to point your attention to is a few key findings there. On the very bottom, we've got the new multifamily rate class broken out there. And one of the key findings when we identified those customers, we plotted their usage and looked at them as we look at February, which is the minimum month billed, and we move to July, the maximum month, we see very little change in that customer classification. There's very little seasonal or transitional demands that that customer brings to the system. But as we move up to an orange residential, you'll start to see that as we move across the months toward that summer peak, there are significant differences in the volume that that customer class is demanding of the system. In addition, if we move to commercial, we see a little bit more peaking activity, and in the gray, we see even more with the water-only meters. So the entire difference there between the minimum and the maximum is roughly 1.98. The system almost provides double the amount of water delivered from February to the July maximum month. The AMI data as well, we're showing it here in a monthly format, gave us, in some cases, hourly ratings, in some cases, twice a day. And so if we look at some of those, the factors are even greater on those very particular windows when a lot of people turn on the taps or different uses. So with that information, we were able to update the cost of service. As a basis, the last cost of service analysis was finished in 2003, so a little over 15 years ago. And so if we start from the left and move to the right, updating the cost of service to recognize the investment we've made in a system, the proportional usage that each customer demands on it, in setting the revenue requirements from each customer class equitably. On the residential class, that would mean from today's levels, we would need to increase some revenue recovery there by about 12.3%, about 1.69 million more. You can see on the multifamily from that last graphic, we talk about their usage being a little bit less. That results when we turn that into dollars or a cost requirement in a decrease from today's level, roughly 30% or $2.41 million. Again, on the non-residential side, from today's revenue requirement to the new updated number, we're seeing a very slight decrease there of roughly 2.5% or $500,000. And then again, based on those usage characteristics that we were able to pull out of the AMI data, water only, we're seeing the need for an increased recovery of the revenue requirement of roughly 31.8%. So with that, I'll transition to the third component of the study, which was the rate design. Roughly speaking, water rates are in two broad categories. One is the fixed charge, which is independent of usage, which is typically the cost included that are things like customer-related costs or fire protection, things that don't necessarily vary with an individual customer's usage. And so we were able to update that. On the volumetric side for the residential, we looked at the inclining block structure, and I will talk about the 4-tier structure that we're recommending out of this study. And then on the non-residential side, we use uniform rates, so they are flat rates for all usage in those particular categories. So CCF, you're going to hear me as I go through and talk about the rate design. Use the term CCF. It's kind of a technical term for volume. We think, I think, more in the terms of gallons, and so I just wanted to include here what 1 CCF or 100 cubic feet of water converts to about 748 gallons. 43 showers, 25 loads of laundry. So just some general, more relatable items to talk about that kind of usage of water. So why add a new tier? You've got 3 currently. We're recommending a 4th tier. What I pulled up here is a graphic that shows the change in volume from that minimum month to the maximum month in July for each of the 4 tiers that we're recommending here. And what I want to point out there is on the residential side, we have a relatively homogeneous group of users. They use water very much in the same patterns, but by pulling out tiers in that, we're able to segment the volume in that particular user class that costs the system the most and apply our proportional rates at a cost of service to the pricing of that tier to make it as equitable as possible. And so here is the structure that we're proposing. On the left side, we've got the current structure, which has 3 tiers and is inclining 0 to 7 TCF, 8 to 20, 8 to 28, 28 and over. What we're recommending is that a 4th tier be added there. And what's important here in the pricing of this is there's nothing necessarily arbitrary about this. So in the state of Michigan, we're required when we set water rates to be cost-based. And so through the cost of service, we were able to identify the cost of peaking on the system, the investments we've made to serve customers. And each one of these rates is a buildup of that particular cost based on how those particular tiers peak the system. So on the non-residential multifamily and the water-only customers, I've got a comparison here of the current rate versus the proposed rate. And so translating, again, those cost of service findings to the actual dollars. For multifamily, that's a decrease from the current level of $381 to $213. For non-residential users, very slight increase of 2 cents on the volumetric rate there. And then in water only, again, one of those things where the data pointed to some very heavy transitional demands on the system. We've got an increase from 589 to 873 a CCF. So on the sewer rate design, it's a little bit simpler than the water side. We've again got the fixed component of the bill and then also a uniform volumetric rate that is applied to every user the same way. We'll mention on a single-family residential house, there is a cap that's applied in the summer essentially to limit how much sewer we bill people. So we look at their winter average usage and we ensure that when they go into the summer that we don't charge them any sewer over that so that we're not unfairly penalizing people that are using those in consumptive manners. So if we look at the sewer volumetric rate, the current rate is $458. The proposed rate based on cost of service is $519. So one of the other issues that was brought up in the study, and I've got a slide here to talk through it, is the footing drain disconnect program. So there's about 2,000 homes that have currently been disconnected, and this is where someone has a drain that's collecting stormwater, but hooked into the sanitary sewer system. And so there's about 2,000 homes that have been disconnected. There's an estimate out there through staff that's about 15,000 homes that are still connected to the sanitary sewer system through a footer drain. There's some challenges in this, and so when we look at this and what we could potentially do with this, some of the thoughts were that there should be a discount for homes that have been disconnected, but there's some real concerns on our side of what's the difference between that and a home that was essentially never connected. And recognizing how cost of service based we have to be, we don't think that necessarily through the utility rates there's a good solution for this particular program. In addition, it requires a much bigger effort as far as intensive data collection to understand exactly what that population of homes is that remains connected to the system. We did some research looking around at various other communities, how they possibly have handled a similar configuration or issue like this, and we're not aware of any other credits or surcharges out there related to a footing drain disconnect program. And so our suggestions on that are to communicate the benefits and review if there's any alternative funding programs to continue that disconnect program. So with that, I would like to bring up some Impacts here, I've got some examples. Again, we have to, when we look at these impacts, recognize that right off the bat, cost of service says for the residential customer, we've got to collect a little bit more money to bring them into alignment with the findings of that cost of service and provide equity to all ratepayers. So this first scenario here, I've just got a two-person household with minimal outdoor usage at 8 CCF, and what we're looking at there is a change here that would be about $14.67 per quarter, or 22%. Scenario 2 is a household usage with a little bit of outdoor irrigation there. With that particular usage pattern, we're looking at about a $14.35 increase, which translates to about 10.4% increase in that particular household's bill. Scenario 3 is a household with a little bit more outdoor usage, 36 CCF per quarter. And in that particular case, it's about a $57.92 change per quarter, or 20%. And it's helpful to compare those rates to different other communities in the state and outside of the state here. One thing to note whenever comparing and contrasting to different communities, we can look at a steady usage level. Here I've got a chart up there for roughly 18 CCF a quarter. We can compare what the different prices would be, but these rate surveys cannot take into account different levels of service. And so one of the things that we have included in here is the stormwater fee that a customer would also pay on their utility bill. Ann Arbor does have a relatively high level of service on the stormwater side compared to some other communities out there. With the proposed rates from our current, we would be moving up on the survey a little bit. And this is, again, at current rates, so this doesn't include any assumptions as to other communities' adjustments in the next year may increase rates as well. On the non-residential impacts here, I've got some selected customer types here, and I've gone through your billing database, pulled out their current bills, applied the recommended changes to the rate. And you can see really this is slight decreases depending on the usage patterns of these particular customers. For a multifamily customer here in the new rate classification, I've got several example usage levels there. And what you can see is the typical trend, as you would imagine, given the decrease from the current rate to the new rate that recognizes the lower demands placed on the system, they widely see a decrease in their bill. The first example there is a decrease of about $67 at 50 CCF a quarter, or down 15.6%. Water-only customers, the last rate class there. This is water-only too. That classification, what that typically is use that's consumptive in some manner, and when a customer has that particular connection to the system, they're not charged any sewer usage, essentially. And so with those particular customers, we would see an increase on their bill based on the recommended rate proposal here, which is in the first one at 20 CCF would be $46.08, or a 33.8% increase. If we go up to the 50 CCF a quarter level, it'd be $122.76, or 41%. And if we go up to the higher usage level of 100 CCF a quarter, that's roughly a $250 increase, or 44.7%. Yes?
Kyle, do you have an example of those? Would that be where the community farming, would they fall under water only consuming, like our farmers market people who are?
So they're, I don't have the exact list right in front of me right now, but those uses run the gamut. So actually there's people on the residential side that have a water-only meter, presumably for irrigation usages. There are commercial customers that use it for consumptive uses related to their business. And then there's additional irrigation demands placed on that side. It's about 500 or so customers on that particular class, so it's not a huge rate classification by any means.
Okay.
Affordability analysis. So again, I think this was one of the key things that kicked off this cost of service study. I want to talk about it a little bit because when we talk about affordability, especially in the state of Michigan, we're bound a little bit by the legal constraints placed upon us. So in order to create rates here, we need to comply with the legal environment that says that they need to be cost-based, and they need to be proportional to a customer's usage. And so within that particular environment, we can't necessarily make any arbitrary changes to rates based on things that are outside of that cost of service environment. So what we did within the study is we identified customers and areas with affordability challenges and looked at their usage patterns so that when we do adjust the rates based on cost of service, we can understand the impacts on those customers. And what we identified out of that is the majority of those homes would fall into the first or second tier of usage that we've constructed. And then affordability recommendations. So the central one there at the top is that a new multifamily rate be created, and we believe that this is an indirect impact to families with affordability challenges. Obviously, in some cases, a multifamily who's paying the bill is not necessarily the renter. Continue to work with the community, and so we think there may be some additional work that can be done from a non-utility rate perspective. And I've highlighted some of those up here. Proactive communication through customer service of the various programs that are available out there. Partnerships with community partners such as Barrier Busters or the county to avert crisis needs. And then additional efforts with regards to quantifying the population of affordability challenged ratepayers out there. And seek funding from non-rate revenue sources that could potentially alleviate some of those needs. What I've got up here is a trajectory of rates as it stands right now with the analysis that we've done. On the first one at the very top, we've got the water rates. What we're seeing is the pressure based on operations, capital needs is for a continuation of 6% increases starting there in January of 19, and we're forecasting that out through 2022. Now, I will say that with the dynamic model left behind, these revenue needs will be reevaluated on an annual basis and updated. On the sewer side, we're seeing a 7% need into the future right now. Bringing it all together, so talked about water rates and sewer rates. What an actual ratepayer will see is the bill chart in front of you here. This is an average user on the system, and I've also included the stormwater utility on there. In addition, Ann Arbor gives a 10% discount on the bill for utility service for on-time payment. So taking that into account, looking at the typical 2018 bill versus the 2019 bill, which you can see there in the bottom table, as a quarterly increase on average, there's about $19.22, 10.92% increase. So study implementation, if approved, reclassify 2,500 or so commercial accounts into the new rate classification of multifamily. Again, continue the heavy communication effort that's already begun with this study to continue to educate ratepayers on the changes and structural adjustments. And so with that, I'll end my formal remarks and always happy to entertain a dialogue or any questions that come up here.
I'd like to open up the commission for discussion. Are there questions? Commissioner Mirsky?
I've got several.
Sure.
So I'll ask a few and then open the floor to other questions. First of all, just for clarification, on your early slides, you talked about capital costs. I don't know if that was exactly the term. I assume that's not the annual capital investments, but the depreciation?
No, that would actually be based on the cash needs of the system right now. So when we look at the 5-year adopted CIP for both systems, that is the currently adopted programmatic, and it's kind of an average number for the next 5 years.
But typically expenses are not the capital expenses because capital expenses are depreciated over the life of the asset. So I'm wondering if those were handled properly then.
No, so these are based on the cash flow needs of the system. So exactly what cash we need to come in for the system, and then what's actually going out and being invested for the system. So depreciation from that particular perspective is a non-cash expense on those.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Then there's several slides, 19 through 21, and then also one of your slides toward the end that talk about average quarterly increases. I think that's a little bit misleading because actually people are not going to see an average quarterly increase. They're going to see a big increase in the summer months. And as someone spoke from the community, if we do any communication on what the impact is going to be, we really should communicate what people will see as a maximum hit. And one of the reasons why I say that, and this is probably not applicable to Ann Arbor, at least to the same degree, but I think we all know that there's lots of families in the United States that have a limited amount of cash to respond to an emergency or maybe a major increase in expenses. And so if someone is in that category and then they see a substantial increase in their expenses in the summer months, that's completely different than seeing a, whatever it was, $40 increase, 4 quarters averaged out. So I think we need to be sure we communicate that. I'll allow other questions then. Just.
I have a question. I'm wondering if you could, you mentioned the legal restrictions in the state of Michigan, and I wondered if you could explain that a little bit, explain the boat law and the restrictions that come along with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned the boat law specifically. That is one of the constraints that as a municipality setting rates with utilities that we particularly look to for some guidance. In that particular case, the understanding, the consensus that we have to conform with it is that the rates need to be cost-based, which means that we need to have a full understanding of what the cost is, the generation, the drivers of cost on the system. And then for an individual user, we have to be able to show a clear nexus of proportionality. So how do you use the system, and how does that translate into your particular utility bill? And those are the ones that were really some of the guiding principles as we look to set these rates, and why we have such a heavy emphasis on the cost of service.
Commissioner Mirsky?
Another question. Following up also on another comment, I'm a little bit concerned about what the demand response might be to the significant increase in costs, especially in Tier 4, maybe even in Tier 3 customers. So just as an example, maybe not entirely applicable, but in California, we know with the drought, customers were asked to reduce their water consumption. I think statewide water consumption for residences went down about 30%. So what I'm wondering is if there's going to be a substantial demand drop in response to the price increase, which would mean there would be a revenue shortfall that would require then an adjustment to rates going forward. Was that taken into consideration, and if so, how?
Yeah, absolutely it was. So, one of the things we looked at there, and you're exactly right, when the price of any good, and we can think we go to the grocery store increases, one of the things we look at is how can we change our behavior to mitigate some of that impact. This particular rate study did look at that. The ones that were particularly in focus are thinking about the volume that's in that fourth tier, the really high price tier. And what we looked at that is kind of a revenue at risk perspective. What if we lost most of that revenue, or a good portion of it? What would the impact be to the utility? That was factored in, and we were able to scenario model that, what that would happen. The impacts of that were tolerable with the current setup.
Okay.
Commissioner Rico?
I apologize if I missed this during the presentation, but I was looking back at slide 9 where you were showing the breakout of the different classifications of customer. And commercial looks like it has a pretty significant variability based on month of use too. I'm curious why we're not thinking about some sort of tiered structure for them and only residential if they're both seeing fluctuations monthly.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely, it's a wonderful question, right? Why can't we get to that same level where we can put on tiers and recognize the changes of usage in that way? The particular quandary that we have when we go to a commercial usage is that they're not a homogeneous group like residential homes. The usage is much more dependent on the activity going on behind the meter. And you can imagine from just a walk down the street, the different kinds of water demands on a same 1-inch meter that might be serving a laundromat versus serving a restaurant versus serving some other commercial usage. That is the particular reason why we can't set up a tier with some kind of logic behind it that would be applicable in that case.
Commissioner Grant?
Yeah.
Who's the largest contributor to our water system in terms of quarterly payments at the moment?
I would look into that, but I would imagine a university would be pretty far up there.
And any estimate of what those numbers are?
But we have it all in the billing database. I don't have it right in front of me. They do have a very significant amount of different connections and configurations. I think in total it's a little over 400 separate connections to the water system.
In the millions.
Yeah.
And how does this set of changes affect them?
So this set of changes will affect each of those a little bit differently. If it's a multifamily use behind it, and for the purposes of this rate study, dormitories were considered a multifamily type usage, that particular rate will go down from the current rate. Where the other uses, whether they be water only or whether they be commercial, will be subject to the other rates. I don't have the entire bill calculation right in front of me, but that's exactly how it will unfold.
Very good.
Commissioner Mirsky?
Can you explain briefly why there's such a substantial difference in water rates between Ypsilanti and Ann Arbor? Is it can't be that there's different water quality differences, I assume. Is it that they have very few tier 3, tier 4 type customers and thus not big differences in seasonal demand? Do we understand why our neighbor has rates that are substantially less based on, I don't know, I forget what slide it is, but
Yeah.
it's significant.
Yeah, I think you're speaking of the
Yeah.
survey here where we looked at the average user compared to different communities. And so that's again kind of goes back to that discussion of, I don't know the exact drivers behind why they set up their rate structure the way they did. The other thing that comes into account a lot of times is level of service and what kind of level of service they're providing in their community. And that's an individual decision that each community makes. In addition, each community is in a different investment cycle with regards to the age of their system. So there's a lot of factors that go into particular. I do not know directly to your question what the drivers are between their specific rates.
I think it's something that the city should consider looking at, that should be driven by council. I mean, it's roughly, 50% higher. So it's not insignificant. And if Ann Arbor is looking at saving money and maybe potentially offsetting rate increases in the future, so not only are our rates higher now, or where they will be higher with this new situation, but we're going to be going up 6 to 7% a year. It's from a cost efficiency and cost to serve perspective, it seems to me that that's something that the city should be looking at. That's not directed at you, but that's directed at city councilors in the room.
Stormwater's not charged in Ypsi, however, so if you look at just water fees, they're similar.
So that water fee does not include any stormwater then? Okay. That's an explanation.
Commissioner Vivo?
Thinking about the messaging and how this is communicated, I'm thinking back to the slide where you were showing the different tiered rates. And did you do any kind of analysis around the percentage of households that would experience each tier?
Yeah, no, we absolutely did. Go back down here. I've got a backup slide here with some additional data on it that goes right to that question. This is where I pulled the residential volume and bill distribution. This was the last year, fiscal year 16 for this particular analysis, full year 16. And you can just see in here the particular volumes that would fall in those tiers on a quarterly basis and the bills that would fall in there. And so you can see they widely center around tier 2, and then as we go up in there to the 4th tier, it's down to about 4,800 bills a year that get into that kind of a usage level.
Great.
Commissioner Epple?
Since you got this slide out,
Sure.
I think that this tier system is great for being able to communicate the benefits of conservation. What would be needed in order to also get this on the commercial, for the commercial customers as well? Do you, how far away are you with the analysis that you've done to be able to make this sort of thing also replicable for commercial customers?
And to get the specifics part of your question is inclining blocks for commercial customers?
Exactly, tier for the, because
Yeah.
they're members of our community too. They should also be thinking about conservation of this resource that we all share. And it would be nice if their billing could reflect that, just like it does a residential customer.
Yeah, and it gets back to that discussion again on what they're doing behind the meter and the particular drivers of demand. And they just vary widely from particular commercial establishment to particular commercial establishment. The only, just thinking in a broader perspective on that, if you look across the country, the only rate structures that are capable of really doing what you want to do are, it's known as kind of water budgets, where it's almost an individual rate for a particular customer. That is widely seen kind of out in the California. And those are the only ones that I can think of right off the top of my head that get to maybe that exact equity question you're asking. With the particular data that we have available, we just don't know, our knowledge stops at the meter. I don't know the particular drivers of demand, and it would be unfair to users that are using water efficiently to punish them with a structure that wouldn't be applicable to their particular usage patterns.
Commissioner Needham.
So, does the proposed rate structure, I mean, I understand there's no crystal ball here, but the proposed rate structure would fully meet all the foreseeable revenue needs for the foreseeable future. Like, we wouldn't need to have a bond sale to improve the water treatment plant if this were adopted, presumably. Is that true?
No, it's not necessarily. So the particular rates that I have shown today are the result of the cost of service study, which really look at the very detailed analysis of what are your cost drivers and how do we most equitably recover the current cost of the system. On a go-forward basis, there would be a need for additional revenue increases overall, 6% on the water side, 7% on the sewer. And your particular question is how we fund capital, per se, with financing. In the future, if there are capital projects that require financing, that could still be handled under this program. That's something that would kind of be looked at an ongoing basis with city staff.
Do we currently have a program for regular replacement of mains?
I can infer, yeah, I believe, yeah, absolutely.
And this covers those costs?
They are included in the analysis. The particular rates you're seeing, though, I just want to be very clear, are based on the cost of service analysis.
Right.
And so, as those costs and we look into the future, those revenue increases are directed at meeting some of those additional needs in the future.
I have an additional question about equity. I know that the low-income housing was reclassified with multifamily housing, and I know that there are restrictions on how that the low-income housing bills cannot be subsidized. And the kind of unavoidable outcome of that is that luxury student housing and other high wealth residences are all included in the same tier structure, and there's not a way to differentiate that. Is that correct?
From a pure cost of service standpoint, the kind of drivers that you're describing behind that don't necessarily factor into how a particular user utilizes your system.
But legally, we're not able to differentiate that. Is that correct?
No, we legally need to conform to cost of service results and the proportionality of a particular customer's usage.
Are you aware of any other cities that have been able to address this, that have the similar restrictions? Is there a way to encourage that these savings that the landlord would presumably receive would get passed on to the tenants?
I am not aware of that, no. And the only other cities that I know that have tried to address that have done it outside of the rates. That was one of the suggestions on the side, so to look at any alternatives that may be non-rate funded, that are a little bit more flexible.
Would you be able to share those stories with us, those other cities where they've been able to do that, the approach? I mean, not right now, but are you able to refer us to that?
Would be able to do a follow-up, sure.
Okay, great. Commissioner Bannister.
Yes, just to follow up along on that line of what Susan's saying, as a Ward 1 council person, I have been hearing a lot of concerns that while we support the original intention, or while the residents support the original intention of trying to help the low-income people with the water bill, that in practice, the question is, will this particular system really help low-income tenants? Because as Commissioner Susan was mentioning there, the multifamily residential buildings don't have separate water meters. And so that reduction in the water rate is enjoyed by the landlord and won't likely ever get to the tenant. And so these multifamily can include luxury apartment buildings. And so furthermore, the voter, the single-family voter on a fixed income, it might see a huge increase in their water bill, like as the public comment, you know, if you had a leaky toilet or an outdoor spigot was leaking, or, you know, any numbers of leaks that we experience, you could suddenly, you know, so there's a lot of concern that these buckets are not gonna achieve what we're trying to do.
No, I definitely hear you. I mean, it was definitely one of the first things that as we started the study that was pointed to as one of the reasons to initiate it. You know, as I've mentioned a few times, the legal environment we're operating in really heavily binds us to cost of service results. It doesn't give us the necessary flexibility that others enjoy in other states in different legal environments. With regards to your specific question about multifamily and if it's passed through, you know, yeah, I totally agree. You know, there's no way that we could know whether it be fully passed through. Presumably, it does lower the cost of that housing. Now, who necessarily benefits it depends on that relationship between the tenant. What I can tell you is the results of this study try to accomplish the most fair and equitable level of rates based on particular customers' usage patterns.
Are there other questions? Commissioner Grant.
I just would like to compliment the city on the particular consultant that they hired for this work. I was a member of the group, the advisory group, and was so impressed, as you probably are this evening. And I'm really excited that they are going to give, as happened with the stormwater model a couple of years ago, give the city the model to use. So the city each year, as part of its budgeting process, will be able to plug in current numbers and see how rates might get adjusted up or down in each subsequent year. The 6% and 7% annual rate increases really reflect the current thinking about inflation and infrastructure. That means inflation in the cost of doing things like fixing roads. Every year we don't do something, it's going to get more expensive. In any case, I was mightily impressed and very grateful for, I guess, probably 3 decades now that you've been working to assemble this model on all the places that you've helped. Thank you.
I would echo that. I was not as faithful a member of that committee as
I should say one other thing. I'm probably one of those very high-tier residential single-family homeowners, and so are many of my clients for whom I install and maintain irrigation systems. I've watched this entire discussion last winter and really concluded that they really have done a very fair job about structuring these rates relative to the demand on the system. And I remember early July 1998, when it was 104 in the shade and a 40-mile-an-hour wind, and it hadn't rained since Easter Sunday, and everybody was watering. And it wouldn't be good if you couldn't get water out of the water tap. So we really do have to think about what that peak demand is and be able to deal with it. Conversely, I'm really going to stand on my colleagues in the business and say you cannot have an irrigation system under your control. It doesn't have a rain sensor. I don't want to see irrigation systems running in the rain. And there are many other things we can do to conserve water. I don't think most of my clients are going to quit watering, so I don't think there's going to be a demand problem. But there will be some grousing when bills in the third and fourth quarters come in half again or double what they have been. Thank you.
I also just wanted to compliment the work that you did. I was not able to attend all of the meetings because they conflicted with my work schedule, but I did get the notes, and I really appreciated the effort that you made to include as many members of the community as you were able to. I was really impressed with the diversity of representation that was there, and I know that took a lot of work, and I really appreciate the effort behind that. All right.
One other thing.
Yes.
I understand that you don't know what's happening on the other side of the meter. I guess I would just like to put forth my hope that I work in a similar industry as Commissioner Graham, and I think those residential clients are going to hurt a little bit when they see their water bills in July, and I would hope that commercial irrigation places would feel the same, and they won't. And so that is disappointing to me. And I don't know if there's any way for us to be able to, I don't know, this is kind of our opportunity. I don't know when we're going to do this again. I also just hate it when I see these systems running in the rain, and a lot of them are commercial, because it's not hurting them one bit. So I would just love to see some way of getting at that, because they're just not going to change their behavior until they feel it. So we can encourage all we want, which I do, and I know Commissioner Graham does, but you know, there's only so much you can do, and there are a lot of really good systems out there. So I think it could just nudge a commercial customer into saying, well, maybe we should think about some of these sensors, because they really have come down in price a lot. So anyway, that's my one discomfort, I think, with this. Otherwise, I've also been impressed with the study.
Commissioner Apple.
Yeah, I have one more comment. Even though you don't know what goes on the other side of the tap, how come you couldn't look at what is going on from the meter perspective in February and what's going on from the meter perspective in July? Because there would obviously be more where there is irrigation happening. When a commercial or a multifamily is acting as a water-only user, you would be able to see that increase in the water and then be able to bill for that. Would you not? Would that not? Would that somehow not be applicable under Bolt?
So I think the question gets to the heart of even if we see correlation, that's not necessarily the causation of that activity. If there was a business that had seasonal trends that were not consumptive irrigation trends, but rather related to the way that their business operated, large spikes in demand maybe that correlate to the same time, that customer would be in that same bucket. And so that again just gets to that exact discussion of we don't know the exact usage going on, and the level can be very different. And so it's just not exactly as easy to extrapolate that into a rate structure.
Isn't that what already exists for residential customers who have a water-only component to their bill? I knew somebody who had a home-based business that grew plants in the backyard. They paid residential rates, and in the summer they paid a water-only bonus onto that. Couldn't these commercial clients all be billed at this different rate, but then have the potential to be able to say, this is the nature of my business, and I would like to be billed differently?
It's an interest. I mean, there are some rate structures out there that do take some of that peaking demands you've talked about. You know, in the particular case with all the data that we've had available for this particular study, and that we could use and readily assess in the legal environment, the rates that we presented tonight, I believe, have the best compliance with the legal environment.
Commissioner Smith.
I out of curiosity, was there any consideration, we're talking quarterly billings here. Is there any analysis of and I know the city's chief financial officer has done this in the past, but looked at the potential to go to monthly billings. So I think one of the concerns that we hear a lot is, when you're billed quarterly for this, you don't have a great, if you're not going downstairs and opening up the cabinet in the basement to look how much, your meter says, you don't have a great idea of what your usage is. Do we have an idea of cost and benefit of going to a monthly billing system?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So it was one of the things that came up during the study. Obviously the data available here is relatively granular, and we have very good data with that. There was, as part of the study, an effort, and we had some good discussions about those exact costs and benefits. There were some significant, though, transitional costs in order to implement that from where we were today. I think it's something that in the future, should that continue to be a need, something that could be reevaluated and possibly implemented. There are a lot of utilities out there that do monthly billing.
And then just a second, totally unrelated question. Are you aware of anybody outside of, say, California or Arizona that has any kind of local ordinance requiring commercial irrigation systems to have rainfall sensors?
I'm not, but I could, in some of the follow-up, look at that. I do think there are a few, I'm based out of Florida, I think there are a few that do have some that get to the heart of that. I'm talking about kind of the, when you do install a new system, that it be kind of up to date and kind of have those similar attributes.
Yeah, I think that would be something worth exploring, pursuing, following up on Commissioner Gibb Randall's comment is, for the commercial users that don't see the same tier structure, that would be something that we would, if we end up adopting this, that would be something that we would want to do in conjunction.
Yeah.
Yep.
Commissioner Bannister.
Yes, I just want to sort of echo what Commissioner Smith said about the monthly billing, because that fit in with what the public comment said about, will there be warnings? So a monthly bill would move towards being closer to a warning. And one other comment, if a quarter of the revenue comes from this fourth tier, and because it's so punitive, people start not using that money, and it decreases our overall revenue, what happens then?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. There is some revenue and a pretty significant amount that's generated off of that particular tier. What we looked at is this sensitivity analysis, essentially, of what kind of reactions that we could possibly see from that and how they would flow through from the revenue side of the equation. In that particular case, we don't believe that would necessarily have too adverse effects on the system. It's something, though, that as you do any kind of rate structure modifications, you want to continue to reassess, continue to look at and understand how those consumer behaviors are changing over time. Consumer behaviors over any period of time typically do change, and we continually look at the revenue needs of the system and how to adjust for that.
And just one last comment, the multifamily does include all the U of M
It
dorms?
does. It does.
It does, okay, that's tricky, yeah.
It does.
Any other questions? All right, we have before us a resolution to recommend that City Council adopt the new comprehensive water and wastewater cost of service and rate design study, and to adopt the recommended rates as proposed as followed. Resolved, the Ann Arbor Environmental Commission approves the City of Ann Arbor's comprehensive water and wastewater cost of service and rate design study. And resolved, the Ann Arbor Environmental Commission recommends that the Ann Arbor City Council approve this study and adopt the recommended rates as proposed. You've heard the resolution. Is there a motion to consider the question of adopting the resolution?
So moved.
Commissioner Mursky, is there a second? Commissioner Graham, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay, the motion carries. You have a second resolution in your packet that is also related to water rates. And I'm sorry that it is coming to you so late. There was an earlier iteration of this resolution that was posted earlier this week on Legistar. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it. But essentially, this resolution asks City Council to direct the city administrator and the city attorney to ask whether there might be a mechanism such as another municipal ordinance that we could use, or fee structures, or some other mechanism that would encourage the savings created by the new multifamily customer class to be passed on to tenants. And again, I want to emphasize that this is a resolution that just asks the question, just asks them to look into it. I know that this is a priority for City Council, and I believe it's a priority for this group as well, and it's my feeling that if we are going to make a change in improving the equity in the state, we have to be creative and look into it and see what we can do. And it's just a request to ask the attorneys to do that. I know you haven't had much time to review this, but I'd still like to open it up for discussion. Commissioner Apple.
I'd like to mention that I'm in favor of the resolution in spirit, but also over time, allegedly the markets will allow some of this savings to be able to pass down to customers. I'm rarely one to stand up in defense of capitalism, but I also think that there are ways that this savings should end up trickling down, if you will. But again, I appreciate the sentiment of the resolution very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Mursky.
I assume that one of the measures could simply be communication to tenants that their landlords received such a decrease, and that they should, in effect, demand to see that impact their costs. That would be one possible action, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Isn't the decrease very minor, if I remember from the PowerPoint, between the commercial and the multifamily rate?
Yes, but we're talking about the broad category of the multifamily rate, that there's not a distinction between a luxury high-rise and a low-income.
I see. Okay, sorry.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
As long as we've got our friends from Stantec here, could you provide a little bit of insight into how you went about the definition of classes? And I ask this question because the university is obviously the greatest non-residential customer of our water system. Do we not have the flexibility to create an institutional rate that would be charged to them that, I think all of us, when we talk about luxury high-rises, we're talking about a dozen buildings in the city. But when we're talking about the university, we're talking about our biggest ratepayer and our biggest consumer. And, if some of that is residential, is there a way to not have them lumped in with the multifamily?
So to answer your question from the most broad perspectives, as you start to look at in a particular community, why you have rate classes, why you differentiate. The question first and foremost is there, clear lines that we can draw to try to differentiate that and proportionally allocate revenue requirements to them. Obviously, the more rate classes you have administratively, that becomes a little bit harder. What I can say is that the current rate classes that we've put into place, from the data that we received and have an understanding, make the most sense for the particular customer classes. When we did group the customer classes, and you particularly talked about dormitories, differentiating dormitories from other multifamily, those particular users, when we had them all grouped in, have very similar demand characteristics. It would be much harder for us to take a scalpel, I guess, to that.
So I guess my question might be more for our staff than for anybody else, but, in how we build a university, do we just build them one kind of commercial multifamily rate, or do we bill all of their buildings differently and separately?
It would be differently and separately. It's actually they are applied to the very specific usages that they're using in demanding water, just like any other customer. So they have, under that current proposition.
I can just make it very simple, Kyle. They're charged per the meter. So
Okay.
if a building's got a meter, it gets a separate bill.
Okay.
Commissioner Needham?
Since this resolution does in part deal with conservation measures, I wondered if we might find a way to address the concern that Commissioner Gibrandal and Commissioner Graham raised here about irrigation systems. I can think of a couple ways we might potentially do that. The easiest way, I think, in the first resolved clause, we could just amend that to read to provide all residents and businesses. Or if we specifically wanted to call it out, we could add a third resolved that would start the same way as the first two, but ask that we evaluate a requirement for water customers with irrigation systems to install rainfall monitors. If that's the correct term.
I accept that amendment. I would like to add that amendment.
Suggest water conservation measures.
Yeah.
There's more than just
Okay.
Okay.
rain sensors to do.
Okay. Can we say water?
The third resolve?
Yes. Water conservation measures, including rain sensors, is that?
Good. That's clearer to people. That's the first thing to do in any case.
So the wording would be the same, to evaluate, and then what's the recommended wording?
I don't.
A
can you-
requirement for water customers with irrigation systems to install
Water conservation measures, including rain sensors.
Did you get that, Matt?
Yeah, I've got requirement for commercial water,
Yeah, commercial though.
that's what you meant, right? Commercial? Water
Well,
customers.
I would think all.
But the residential are gonna get it anyway, because they're getting the higher rate because of it, so they're kind of already taken care of in a
One
way.
hopes.
Well, yeah.
Water isn't really very expensive, it's an actual.
Yes.
I
Including,
mean, lawn
what was it,
mowing
water
costs more.
sensors?
So- Yeah. Water sensors or rain sensors?
Rain sensors.
Rain sensors.
Or like such
They have
as,
a-
I think, is kind of
Such
what it
as-
would be.
Yes, such as rain
Because
sensors.
there's weather detection stuff, and there's all kinds
Yeah,
of
there are
things.
a lot of ways of doing
Right.
that, increasingly.
There's a shortage of pens back here. We're having to rely on.
No, and I think I'd model it on the first paragraph, so we're not putting businesses in the first paragraph. We'd have a second resolve, the Environmental Commission recommends the City of Ann Arbor City Council direct the city administrator, city attorney to evaluate what actions the city could take to require commercial water customers to install water conservation measures such as rain sensors. Is that?
Yeah. Is that? Are we ready to take this up tonight? Yeah.
Moved.
Okay.
second.
Matt just read the resolve clauses, and I don't have a copy of it in front of me, but I can do it again. Resolved, the Ann Arbor Commission recommends that the Ann Arbor City Council direct the city administrator and city attorney to evaluate what actions the city could take to provide all residents incentives to conserve water and save money by reducing their water use. Resolved, the Environmental Commission recommends that the City of Ann Arbor the Ann Arbor City Council direct the city administrator and city attorney to evaluate what ordinances, fee structures, or other actions the city could take to best ensure that these new water savings are passed on to tenants. Resolved, the Environmental Commission recommends that the Ann Arbor City Council direct the city administrator and city attorney to,
Value, here, I'll finish
sorry.
the last one. Yeah, because I've got notes here. To evaluate what actions the city could take to require commercial water customers to install water conservation measures such as rain sensors.
all right. You've heard the resolution. Is there a motion to consider the
You
question?
got it already.
Oh, I guess I did. Is there a second?
You got
Commissioner
that too,
Newton?
John?
All right.
From
All in
Bob.
favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right, next, thank you for transcribing that. Next, we have a report from committees and chair. I can give a report for the metrics committee to say that Josh McDonald is going to to cover that for us. Are there any other committee reports? Commissioner Brandel.
I'm not a committee, but for commission, I guess, if that's
sure.
okay.
That's fine, yeah. We can throw them all together.
We've been doing a lot. We set ourselves up to do a lot to evaluate new medical marijuana dispensaries in the city. And how it relates to this body, I would say, is that even though they are having to provide a lot of information for the current site that they are existing in, and they're not proposing any changes, one thing that the city has been asking them to look at is their bike parking, despite the fact that they're changing nothing else. And so even though we may be reviewing 5 of these every week now, because there's a whole lot of them coming through, which is taking up, I think, a lot of, staff and planning commission time, it has been rewarding to see that bike parking has been bolstered through this process as well.
Great. Is there a pollinator update? Okay. Can I ask for an Energy Commission update, please?
Sure. I think really the main topic at the Energy Commission was a resolution that was discussed and passed requesting the city to support or to notify essentially the MPSC that we recommend that it reject DTE's application for a new 1,100 megawatt natural gas plant. The rationale being that as presentations in previous meetings and as discussed in that meeting, the belief is that natural gas prices will probably increase faster than what the assumptions were, that there is a possibility of reducing demand through energy optimization and efficiency measures, and that more can be done with renewables. And the request that DTE go back and reevaluate its calculations and come back with a new recommendation. That was passed by the Energy Commission, and it's my understanding that the resolution was taken up in Monday's council meeting in private session because apparently there are some issues related to DTE, whether the city's relationship with DTE on a couple of other issues, and apparently their potential was that that could negatively impact some of those other issues, and so as of right now, City Council is not acting on that resolution. That was really the major topic.
Commissioner Grant?
Some of you may know, and certainly Commissioner Gibb does, next month the council will be considering what's called the Universal Development Code, which takes our 5 or 6 separate ordinances that govern the development of property in the city, excluding single-family houses, and combines them into one chapter, one code. The motivation to do that, and it's been going on for the last 8 years, was a lot of conflicting language between all of these things that were built up over decades, really, and to make the language more understandable to petitioners coming forward with applications to do things. I think the code goes to the council for first reading, the first meeting in April, and second reading, the third meeting in April. Members of the Natural Features Committee, particularly Wendy Carmen, who served for many years on the Zoning Board of Appeals, have been offering some suggestions to tweak the language, which still is going on and will until the last minute. And then a list of things that at least the Natural Features Committee has wanted to amend and improve in the development process can go forward. We've been waiting for this day for quite a while. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Brandel.
Can I just add one piece to that? I'm glad you brought that up. That this first take at combining everything is not intended to change the code substantially in any way. It's meant to really streamline and combine and try to get rid of as many inconsistencies as possible. But there will be another effort that is coming later to address any kind of substantial changes that we feel like, need to happen, of which there is a substantial list, I think. But this first take is really just to pull it all together, make it more comprehensible, streamline everything. In the course of that, there's some things that they've had to actually change content-wise because there were literal conflicts going on that they had to resolve. But the second take will provide more opportunity for real updates to the code. This one is really more about how it's put together kind of stylistically, if you will.
Go ahead.
Well, along that line, on those streamline and combine is good, but on where they're resolving a conflict, is there gonna be a list or anything that?
Yeah, they have a whole footnoted system,
Yeah.
and that I would imagine you will likely be able to follow if you choose, to be able to show all the differences that are there. That won't live in the final document because it would just be huge. Tracked changes on something like this would just be ridiculous, But they did have a whole footnoted system to be able to compare them. So you can follow it to a certain extent to see what it was before and how it may have shifted a little bit in this version. But again, the intent was really to try to keep it the same ideas, just in a new format.
For those of you who are fans of natural features and know what the land development regulations contain with regard to natural features, back when those amendments were passed in 2004, we had a set of guidelines that we wrote about each natural feature and classified them of high concern or middle concern or low concern, and had different suggestions to staff and the council how they might deal with natural features that fall in those three categories. Those were put outside the Chapter 57 ordinance back in 2004 because we weren't sure that, well, we were afraid of being sued by the development community. Trying to enforce something that had no master plan component. Now we have a natural features master plan component that had no experience or from any other community and state about how natural features would be handled. Now those things are coming into the code and will be enforceable with the rest of it. What's been wonderful over these years is that the development community immediately accepted these regulations and very rarely argued with the cities and the planning staff and the planning commission's decisions in return for much more prompt approval of their applications. Some of you remember the 1990s when we had these year-long conflagrations and council committees to try to deal with conflicting opinion about how natural features should be handled on properties that are being developed. Things have worked out very well and peacefully, and it's really quite gratifying to see this stuff in code.
All right. Sure. We'd like to move on and ask for a solid waste resource management update, please.
Good evening. So, included in your packet, hopefully everybody has seen it and even perhaps had a chance to review it, was a memo from myself to the commission updating everyone on the background and status of our solid waste resource management plan and the RFP and procurement process. So won't necessarily go through it word for word, hopefully self-explanatory, particularly the purpose, the background, what we're driving at, but really just to catch everybody up to speed and the quick highlights. And really my goal here is to see if folks have any questions, is to really recap very quickly the RFP process that we've extended the standard RFP process broadly. We received 4 proposals, which were reviewed by a staff committee, as well as Commissioner Mirsky. Thank you, John, for helping us again. Very much appreciated. So Commissioner Mursky joined us both in review of the proposals and the interviews. We interviewed all 4 teams, and through the end of that process and assembling recommendations, the recommendation of the group, the staff committee, and included in the memo with particular highlights of what really brought this group, Aptum is the firm that we are recommending. Many key components that we have listed there, which we can just highlight really quickly. Really the most complete and full proposal, very robust community engagement, which was key really for everything we do here at the city, but again, this is a very key one and needs that full component. They particularly brought in the commission right into that piece. They specifically have in their work plan coming to you folks 3 separate distinct times. They're hoping to actually get a full 2-hour vision session with you folks, so we still got to work that out, make sure that works with you guys. But actually coming in right at the beginning of the process and understanding what's the vision of this commission, so that can be folded in with setting the goals with the community. Looking to really get the full understanding of the community and where they see things going, how they feel about the system through the resident survey, in this case using the scientific survey, which is very similar to what was done with the organics management plan with the phone survey. So it is a true statistically based, scientifically valid, I think within 5 to 7% error of what the responses they are for the broad community. And very key and also very similar and timely with the presentation we had, actually building and developing and giving to us a financial model for the full solid waste system. So very similar in that we would be able to understand to great detail those cost centers, what the programs are, the components, where those costs of service literally are, what's the revenue coming in, and what can be done going forward, and then with the tool that we can use to develop budgets and programming moving forward. So they really had it all, had it in the package, and best of all, fit within what was in the budget for the project. So with that, staff is recommending Aptum as the team, and we're in the process of preparing a resolution for council targeting the 2nd meeting in April.
Commissioner Smith.
Possible that you could get Matt a copy of the work scope to distribute to us, or at least to the solid waste subcommittee members?
Yep, absolutely. We already have it PDF, so we'll just
Great.
email it
Perfect.
or let Matt know where it is so we can get it to you.
Great.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mursky, do you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, I have a couple of things maybe for clarification and to expand on and illuminate what Crescent just reported. First of all, I think it's important for commissioners to know that Aptum is essentially the same company as CB&I. So there was an ownership change, but the people that did the proposal and have interfaced with the city in the past were the CB&I people. Essentially, I mean, I was not involved in great detail in that, but that's my understanding.
So they have an understanding of the system.
So just a couple of things. In terms of my participation, as indicated, I reviewed all the proposals. By the way, staff, and it was 320 pages of proposal. Maybe a third was fluff, but there was a good book there for all of us.
Thank you again.
Sure. I was present for a short verbal wrap-up. I did not participate in the actual scoring that's indicated in here. By the way, I agree with everything that's written here. In my view, the Aptum proposal as well as the interview went the best of all the 4. The one concern that I want to pass on and that I commented on in advance is the scorecard weighting was 20% for qualifications, 20% for experience on related projects, 45% on the plan, and 15% on the fee structure. And so that essentially communicated, I think probably appropriately so, to the proposers, to the companies that bid on the business, that really the work plan was really the most important thing. I would say the problem was that in spite of that, indexed on a scale of 100, I don't want to go into the details of the individual costs, but if you just index the fees ranged from index 100 to index roughly 260. So there was a huge difference in the cost, and obviously that means there was a big difference in the scope of the work plan, because I don't think that the people working for one company over another company, in fact, they gave us their fee structures, and generally speaking, they were the same. So what that means is that some companies provided a lot more services, in a sense, because of the weighting being 45% for the plan and only 15% for the cost. That was in their favor in terms of the way the scoring was set up. I mean, as I said, and as Crescent reported, the Aptum proposal was very, very thorough, and their interview was good. I feel comfortable, actually. I would have felt comfortable with, I would say, the top 3 of the 4. But I think one of the concerns is that it was really, for me, difficult to compare where some bidders quoted at the level of 100, and others could quote at the level of 250, and we were trying to compare, in my view, apples and oranges. And so I think, and I've already communicated this in writing and emails to the staff that worked on this, as well as to the administrator, that I think we need to look again at our request for proposal processes. We communicated this the last time because we had similar issues when we looked at the recycling contract, and the administrators indicated to me that he intends to come back and revisit that, not only in this one case, but generally. But here's a case where I think that made this difficult. I still feel comfortable with the recommendations, so in a sense, all's well that ends well. But I think it's important that commissioners understand that there's still room for improvement, I think, in these kinds of processes.
Can I open this up for discussion? Are there any questions?
Okay, thank you very much.
I do have a couple of questions, just while we have you here.
Sure.
I know that you were not at our last meeting, but we were able to have Molly and Craig.
Oh, yes, I was indisposed.
And at the time, we had asked some additional questions about the solid waste fund, and we were told that we would be getting answers to those by this meeting, and we haven't received them yet, and I wondered if you knew anything about that.
I will circle back with Mr. Lazarus, as
Okay.
I believe they were put to him, and I'm not sure, he may have some follow-up questions looking for clarification, so I'll try to track him down tomorrow.
Okay.
And we're definitely looking to move those along, and that was the intention, but I will check on the status of those.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Right. I have a resolution that I'd like us to consider, but Josh has sat through a lot of this meeting, and I'd like to bring him up so we can let him go early too, and then have one more resolution at the end. So could you please come?
So I just wanted to begin by thanking you all. This kind of update to the dashboard really comes from a lot of recommendations that you guys gave to us, people to reach out to. Most of this update is actually kind of feedback on what we've come up with by reaching out to certain staff members and others, and how we can continue to improve our dashboard. So that's kind of, I want to kind of just jump right into it. So I'll be looking at a few different metrics here, some of the inputs that we have been getting from staff, and some of the recommendations that they had for us as to what things we should be tracking. So the first one here is Watershed Health. This is the current metric. One of the major concerns that we had with the current metric was just that a lot of these indicators that make up this current metric, we weren't quite sure what the indicators were, what they were trying to get at. So we went ahead and talked to Laura Rubin from Huron River Watershed Council. She kind of gave us some recommendations as to how we could improve them. kind of gave us a composite score. So if you see on the right-hand side there, the approach, the metric that they came up with includes all of those different indicators. So it's very comprehensive. Another issue with the original metric, if we see here, Fleming is included, which is not necessarily in Ann Arbor. With this new metric that they recommended, it is all Ann Arbor watersheds and nothing beyond that. So it's much more Ann Arbor focused. And again, kind of the metric is clearly defined. Some of the variables have targets. So for example, if you're looking at E. coli, phosphorus, there are targets. There is no composite target currently, but it's something that we'll be working on. I think they're coming in May, I believe.
There's a request, I think I submitted it via email, that they have a conflict with our April meeting, but our recommendation was that they come in and give a detailed explanation of this, and I think it would be really illuminating to the whole commission.
Yeah,
And that would be in May, so if we could note that.
Yep.
Yeah, so it was very comprehensive, and I think just having them kind of explain to you guys how they did it and how they put it together, that could be really helpful. So this is kind of the proposed metric. It just shows a score out of 100. Again, this composite score, they scored a whole bunch of these different indicators, came up with 2017. Because it is the first year that they're actually putting it together, we don't have trend data yet, but that's kind of the idea. As you see there, the arrow just says that up is better, just to give you a sense. So kind of closely tied to that, impervious surface. So it was originally a leading indicator for some of the watershed health stuff. When taking a look at it, because it's not going to really move all that much, I'm wondering if it shouldn't be more of a lagging indicator, something that is going to take a while to change, and if we could possibly focus in more on some of the things that the city can do as far as policy, some more kind of leading indicator stuff to work on and kind of put on the dashboard. So,
Jess, do you mind if I comment on that quickly? Actually,
Yeah.
can you go back to one more? One more.
Sorry, back? There we go.
No, go backwards to yes. So land use, land cover is essentially impervious surface. So that is already essentially taken into account in the watershed health. If you go forward again, this is potentially a good lagging indicator for from a mitigation perspective. We know that impervious surface is something that is a big influence on what happens in major rain events and flooding and things like that. So this is essentially incorporated into the watershed health, but we felt that it still made sense to continue to track this as an individual metric. Sorry about that.
Oh, yeah. That's helpful. So we went ahead and reached out to Jen Lawson and Jerry Hancock, and we got two metrics that we might want to add to it. So obviously still keeping the impervious surface, but looking at impervious surface serviced by detention basin. That could be a measurement that's a % of the total surface that's actually serviced by detention basin, as well as stormwater treated by green infrastructure. And these are kind of both getting at the same thing, right? How can we kind of control stormwater and runoff? Some of the ideas with stormwater treated by green infrastructure, for residential, for example, there's rain gardens, there's rain barrels, policies that we could actually influence and that we can affect, and that way, again, you kind of have a leading indicator that it affects, impervious surface as kind of a larger general metric that we're tracking. I did want to quickly mention, for some of these, we don't have a recommended kind of a chart ready, just because some of this information is still being gathered internally. So some of these are at different levels. Some of the data we actually do have, but it just needs to be trended. Some has to be put together still. So they're all at different points. For tree condition, so we went ahead and reached out to Carrie Gray. For this one in particular, there was maybe like two questions. First of all, how representative is this of all trees within Ann Arbor? So there's a question as to city managed trees versus all the trees in Ann Arbor. That was one of them. And then the other thing too is there any trend data on tree canopies? This was actually gathered, and we'll get a little bit more into this in a few slides, but this was gathered mostly from LiDAR data, which is only taken every so often. So this information itself is 2010. It'd be interesting to see if we could maybe update it. So kind of going along with tree canopy, we also have city-managed tree conditions. Again, similar question, how representative is this indicator of all trees in Ann Arbor? Is it only city-managed trees? And again, so we talked to Carrie Gray. She had some recommendations. The first one, so for tree canopy, we did confirm that it actually does include all 1.3 million trees, which is about an estimate for all the trees in Ann Arbor. And that the second metric, the city tree condition, only really covers about 50,000 trees. So those are the trees that are being managed by the city itself. It includes trees, so trees that are along streets, park trees, things of that nature. And they might not necessarily be representative of all trees in Ann Arbor. There was also a recommendation to possibly change the percent. So if we go back one, you see it's in percentage. Change that to a total number because there's actually fluctuations in the number of trees that the city manages. Some of this has to do with the fact that we plant trees, we plant new trees. So could we incorporate that into this metric? Moving on to land use and zoning. There was a few problems with this one just because it came from the NCS. There was questions as to whether we have an objective metric we could track. Obviously, this is very subjective. It was the question related to what's your perspective. They were asking the community, what's your perception of land use, building, and zoning in Ann Arbor? And we were just trying to find something we could pair it with that's just a bit more objective. We didn't exactly know what kind of questions they were asking that, paired to this, so that was one of the things we brought up. So we talked to Brett Leonard, and he said there was two metrics that we could replace it with, one being mixed use along corridors, and the second one being residential units in Ann Arbor. Both of these alleviate the need and kind of the pressure on transportation, specifically from motor vehicles. I can't remember what the actual number he gave us, but the proportion of people who have to come in from outside to Ann Arbor for work, employment, so Ann Arbor employees, it's an incredible number. And it really puts a lot of pressure.
I think he used 80,000 come in every day.
Yeah, so it's huge. And if you're able to create residents within Ann Arbor to really house a lot of those people, get them to not have to take these long commutes, it really helps with the congestion on highways, things of that nature. And the same with mixed use. So if you have these communities, for example, where you have a mixed use situation, a lot of times people don't have to go outside of these neighborhoods. They don't have to drive as far. They're more prone to actually take alternative forms of transportation, things like biking, walking.
Josh, can I ask you a question on that?
Yeah.
Would that need to be coupled with some sort of, I don't know, like metric for the number of jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was more of a kind of high-level overview.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you could probably argue, I use the job case just because the numbers are so huge and it's kind of like this very impressive and probably large portion of people who are coming in from the outside. But I think whenever you have, more residential units within the city of Ann Arbor, for example, it also takes off stressors of even, for example, the cost to rent in Ann Arbor. So I think it has more benefits than just that one.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I would kind of maybe suggest to leave it a little broader.
So if I can maybe also add to what Josh just mentioned. So these are what we consider to be environmental commission related metrics only. Mm-hmm. And there are another set of framework dashboard indicators that relate to community and in particular to economic development. And so there may be something there that we should be looking at longer term, not necessarily this commission, but the city as a whole and other boards and commission to look at those kinds of indicators as they relate to economic development and community that also then have obviously some impact on and influence on environmental factors.
Okay, so moving right along to transportation, which is kind of related to our previous conversation. So we were asking if the American Community Survey was the right thing to be tracking. whether there should be kind of a leading or lagging indicator. We talked to Eli Cooper, who let us know that this is something that has kind of a lag to it, that there's other leading things that we are actually doing as a city that we could be tracking, the levers that we're currently pulling to change non-motorized commutes. Those two metrics are sidewalks, so miles of sidewalks in the city, and the second one is bike lanes. So again, miles of bike lanes in the city. It has a direct impact on non-motorized trips, and then again, there's also some trend data that we can pull from as well. There was, talking about targets, there are actually some targets that we could use that Eli talked to us about as far as non-motorized. And there was a question as to how up to date we could get this. So we're currently working with Eli to kind of update the non-motorized as well as add sidewalks and bike lanes, if that makes sense. Yes?
It'd be very interesting to have quality of those bike lanes included in there as well.
Okay, that's a good, yeah.
Many of them are getting to the point where it's challenging, so.
Yeah.
I think that it's a whole, what we're trying to do with the dashboard.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
And I'm also working on that idea of expanding the Fifth Ward snow removal, the Snow Buddy program on that pedestrian sidewalks, so that, because if there's snow part of the way on your route, that's a weak link.
Mm-hmm.
So if we had citywide snow removal, we'd get more people walking and biking.
Yeah, no, that's definitely an interesting consideration. Okay. So this is just kind of what we came up with. Got some of these numbers from the non-motorized plan, looked at bike lanes and sidewalks. You could actually see quite a jump from 2013 to 2016. Again, something where if we had targets, it'd probably put everything into perspective, but something that's still to be determined, so something we can work towards, as well as sidewalks there. And then finally, solid waste, so waste diverted. There was a question as far as waste streams, so where things were coming from. There was also a question as far as franchised versus non-franchised. And then finally, whether residuals were actually included in this metric. So we did go ahead and talk to waste management staff, and we found some ways to include franchised, non-franchised. I think traditionally the city has not included franchised in some of their earlier numbers, and again, account for residuals that were otherwise counted perhaps as recycling, but ended up actually in solid waste in kind of that.
I'm sorry, by franchise you just mean commercial waste?
I think, yeah.
Well, yeah, so historically, and you may want to jump to but historically we counted recycling that came across the scale, compost that came across the scale, and city waste that came across the scale. And in earlier, before it was kind of a free market, anyone in the business community contracted with anyone they wanted, we didn't have that data. Then when we franchised the commercial waste, and staff, if I make a mistake, you can jump in, but when we franchised commercial waste, all of a sudden we knew the total commercial waste that was out there. But continued to go ahead.
Not quite.
Okay.
Because in addition to the franchised commercial waste, there was still third-party commercial waste, still even in waste management and other trucks, so it was even harder to differentiate originally.
Like commercial and demolition? or
Well, no, just
construction
commercial
demolition?
business. So for example, a waste management truck would go across the scale that had 70% of its route, say in the downtown, but then went out into Scioto Township and picked up more commercial and then came across the scale.
Right, so we didn't know it was city only
Yes,
from those other vendors.
yes.
So as we franchised, we then had more perfect information, but continued to show a diversion rate without that because that's the way we used to do it anyway, so it was apples to apples. What you're gonna see here is a new baseline of doing this where you're including all of our recycling, and this is all in one data set. So we sat down with Christina and other staff to talk about this, and it's a data set that we own and manage and we contract, and we think it's very, very, very good granular data. And so the recommendation from staff is you take the amount that comes across the scale with recycling, you take the amount that comes across the scale with compost, there's city commercial waste that comes in, and then there's franchised commercial waste. The only additional thing we're doing is recognizing that some part of what comes across the recycling scale ends up not being recycled, it's residual. We're taking that out of the recycling, putting that into the landfill amount. And when you do that for this 80,000 tons of material, you currently get a diversion rate of 27%. And it's not a drop in our diversion rate, it's the actual current best measure of our diversion rate. And we know there are other sources out there, like the Bottle Bill collects a lot of material from Ann Arbor. And we are exploring whether or not there's good data we can get on that. Currently, we do not believe we're going to be able to get granular data where it's, because there's a lot of people that return their bottles to Meyer or other places outside the city. There's no way to really say it's Ann Arbor or not. Drop-off stations, another one where there's a fair amount of material. These may be stories we want to tell, but I don't think we're going to tell them in a residual rate measure. And I think there's uniform support for, we ought to do a residual rate. The other thing that we're going to be measuring is, Josh, I'll jump to the next slide, is just landfill totals, because that's one of the things the Star Community Index asks of us. And so that's easy. It's just the same slide Josh showed, and we take off the recycling and the compost, and there's a total amount landfill that we can start tracking over time. So, is that the end?
That is the end.
So I want to thank Josh for doing a huge amount of work, and I want to thank the other staff that, I think Josh mentioned them all, who took time to sit down with us, because this idea of what are we already tracking, make sure, you know, if there's something new, and we did find some interesting things that we didn't expect by working with staff. So I think this is a developing process. I think we're working with Brett in planning this idea of like what proportion of the corridor meets our sustainability metric. That metric hasn't been well defined yet, but Brett has a good sense for what he thinks it ought to be. So I think we're gonna, you know, in the next couple months, we'll have more data to come and bring to you.
Yeah, there's more staff that we'll probably meet with and more kind of data that will come into us. So as we process it, we'll definitely keep everyone up to date on that.
I wonder if I could ask you to telescope out a little bit and talk to us about the grand unification plan.
Grand unification.
Well, yeah, I mean, and this is something that came up in earlier discussions with an idea that we have the sustainability framework with 16 goals. And we're trying to bring together all the targets that have already been spoken for in various plans. So a climate plan is 25% by 2025 and 90% by 2050. There's the Star Community Index, where we've gone through and documented a number of metrics that the city, you know, does well in these areas. And then there's a budget document that lists a lot of goals and targets for the city, and we haven't kind of brought them all together in one place. And so I think the effort that, you know, Josh has been working on is, now that we have the Star Community Index and we've seen some of the metrics that other cities use, what will work for us, and, you know, bring that to the commission. And then ultimately, you know, we should be able to kind of resort what we do by parts of the organization into various sustainability categories, which ultimately will be easier for all of us, because we'll just be tracking one core set of metrics. And whether you organize it by, this is what public services is doing, or this is what we're doing for clean water, it should be a relatively straightforward analysis. Does that help?
It does help. You know, and I think the other thing that comes out of this incredible effort, which I didn't fully understand how comprehensive it was until we had our meeting, and I understood exactly how much work you put into this, which is an incredible amount and really well done. But it will also give us a useful and accurate way to measure our progress on our sustainability goals, so they're not all farmed out among multiple plans and they're not comparable. And I think that that's really useful and incredibly useful to City Council, to staff, and I think it's really useful to us as well. So thank you very much for all of that work.
Yeah, of course. hopefully it was helpful.
Are there questions?
Any questions you guys have?
Just a very brief comment, essentially reinforcing what you said. This exercise, I think, demonstrates the value of SMART goals, where we are very specific, we're measured, they're attainable with a target, they're realistic, or I should say relevant, and they're time-bound. And for years, we really did not do that well, and I think this is what Josh and support, and from Matt and Nate and Emily, I think too, a part of the STAR process. This is really, I think, going to be immensely valuable for everyone to really understand what's going on. And a great example of that is the diversion rate. We had questioned what the diversion rate was multiple times, have been told that it's 46%. It's on the city website. It conveys to residents that we're actually good. They compare our rates to other communities, and it looked good when indeed it was not good. And so I think by constantly looking at these, by setting targets, by measuring our progress against them, it enables all of us, including what I would say is also City Council as essentially an executive board, their oversight responsibility to be able to understand what's going on in the city and how the city is performing against plans, against resolutions, and things like that, targets that council is setting, whether it's affordable housing units, or whether it's climate action plan targets, or whether it's miles of sidewalks. And so I think this is a real illustration of the benefit of doing this.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, finally, I have one more resolution that I would like to have us talk about and potentially consider tonight. This is an resolution that addresses organics recovery. And essentially what it asks is for City Council to allocate $100,000 on education, outreach, and collection equipment to improve organics recovery rates in the fiscal year 2019 budget. And as we know, we had the organics study and the results were not able to be implemented because we didn't think we had the funds. And turns out now, happily, we do have more funds than we thought we had. And so it seems like this might be a way to start to get that process moving. There are a couple of things that I want to point out about this. As far as collection equipment, that's referring to curb carts and kitchen composting collection. And there's also a date on this that we're hoping to have this plan start to go into effect in September of 2018. So it's a very quick timeline. The idea is once the money is allocated, we would work with staff and City Council to figure out what's realistic with our resources and to figure out what the best way to use them and to start to improve the rate. Again, I know you didn't have time to look at this. This was another resolution that was put up earlier in the week, and this is a revision of that. So it's not identical to the first, but it's similar. Commissioner Apple.
How much does this rely on the CB&I report that came out for part of the organics plan?
I think it would very much rely on it. We haven't set out any specific goals or any details, so it's difficult to answer that concretely, but it would certainly use that information. And so it would take advantage of that investment that the city has already made into this process and start to execute it. Does that answer your question?
It does. And part of my reservation, or part of the reason why I'm asking that question is I had some reservations about what we were presented as part of that organics plan. So my concern is, am I voting to move forward on something that I really should review in more depth before we look at this?
I don't think anything would happen wholesale. I think whatever we would be talking about, we would use the organics plan as guidance or a stepping off point, but there's nothing specifically proposed and there's no specific plan that we're advocating that we follow. So I think that that's open.
Thank
Yeah. Other questions?
Would we expect that the $100,000 would be spent by the end of fiscal year 19?
Yes.
Could we or should we add that? Because I mean, as someone who works in standards, the language "to begin in September 2018," you could say beginning is just having one meeting, and we've started.
Fair point.
So I don't know if we need a deadline per se, but it might help.
Can you pass me a pen? And I can see if we
I
can
have
amend
lots.
that. Thank you.
Do we also need to reference the fiscal year? That city council allocate $100,000 in fiscal year 19 for education, outreach, collection, et cetera, in the first resolve clause.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
Can you explain where the 100,000 came from? Like, just give us a sense of kind of, you know, is this a consultant coming in to do this stuff? Is this directing city staff to create this outreach program? Like what was the thinking? I don't need a detailed breakdown, but just some general sense of where the number comes from would be helpful before we vote on something like this.
It comes from a couple of things. The Organics Management Plan recommended that the city spend $3 to $5 per household on education, so that's a basis for some of it. We looked at the cost of curb carts, and we looked at the cost of kitchen recycling containers. It would come out of the solid waste fund. And it would not be something I think we would hire consultants to do. It would be something that we, the commission, would hope to do with staff, and that we would also include outside resources in the community to work on it.
And this is essentially a repurposing of that $100,000 that was allocated for the pilot program that was never implemented.
Correct.
I think it's also worth mentioning, it's not in, unless I missed it, it's not in the resolution anymore, but one of the reasons in the past why proposals like this were of concern to the city was because we were forecasting a dramatic drop-off in the solid waste fund reserve. And the last update that we got, as you recall, indicated that while it's going down, it's not precipitous, and the $100,000 is not a significant hit. And I think in light of the lower diversion rate figure that we know we now have, something like this, both, if you think of the value proposition, the cost is relatively low. The fund is not particularly healthy, but it's not going down the drain like we thought it was before. And this is something that would hopefully have a significant or at least measurable positive effect on the diversion rate.
Does that capture the amendment properly?
Yes, and fiscal year 19 is
July.
starting this July and ending next end of June. Okay, yep.
Other questions, comments? Commissioner Bannister.
Yes, just a brief one about the free kitchen countertop containers. I have one, and I think what the problem was with, or the shocker was the price of the compostable bags to put in there.
Okay.
So I don't know if that has anything to do with the resolution, but that was one of my comments, that maybe participation is low is because you have to pay an arm and a leg to get the special bags.
Well, we haven't specified what the equipment would be sent on, so certainly we could consider subsidizing the bags as well. That's a good idea.
Thank you.
Or don't use them at all.
There's that.
Okay.
And I don't really think that they're that expensive. Like a two-person household, you buy a box of them for $15 and they last you for 6 months. It's not so bad.
Other questions, comments? Do we feel ready to take this up tonight? Do you want to think about it more?
I'll make a motion.
Pardon?
If you, I'll make a motion.
Okay, great.
Second.
Thank you. So I'm going to read the edited resolved clause. Resolved that the Environmental Commission recommends that City Council allocate $100,000 on education, outreach, and collection equipment to improve organics recovery rates. Resolved, the Environmental Commission.
In fiscal year 19, right? Or is that farther down?
I was going to do that. Oh, well,
Yep.
okay, we could do it both places. Fiscal year 2019. Resolved, the Environmental Commission recommends such an effort to be planned and executed, the Environmental Commission recommends such an effort be planned and executed expeditiously to be spent in fiscal year 2019, beginning in September 2018. Resolved that the Environmental Commission recommends that City Council fund this initiative from the unrestricted fund balance of the Solid Waste Fund. Resolved that the Environmental Commission recommends that City Council request a biannual update in October 2018 and May 2019 from staff on progress being made in the implementation of this resolution. The motion's already been forwarded. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Might want to ask if there are any opposed.
Any opposed? Just sounds so unanimous.
I don't
You're
think
right.
we've ever had any opposing votes.
We had one. We had one. I remember one.
I was going to say a bit of housekeeping. There was a dissenting vote to, on
The
the
first-
water rates.
It whooshed past so fast I didn't get to yell out my no.
Oh, and thank you for correcting
Yes,
that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here for public comment?
Hi, my name is still Edward Vilmetti. Oh, oop.
Ed, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I'll try that one more time.
All right.
Your reputation precedes.
So, I have a comment regarding water rates. Again, having heard this particular presentation a couple times, I'm still only a little more clued in as to what the impact will be on the most affected users, the people whose rates whose cost of service in some quarters might be a multiple of their normal rates. And it got me to thinking, based on the curve that was drawn about when the water supply was the most affected by usage, was whether, as an alternative to this set of rates, whether the consultant might be directed to come up with summer and winter rates for water. I mention that only because there are summer and winter rates for sewer, so it would make sense, just off the top of my head, that maybe the regime that we're trying to capture is not residential versus commercial versus dorms versus luxury high-rise apartments or whatever, but really to recognize that there are some months of the year where water usage is high and that rates should be set during those predictable months. And I don't know how predictable they are, because I don't know how many years of data the consultant went through to put July as the peak. I don't know if July is always the peak. Is August sometimes the peak? Do we ever have a peak in September? Or, I don't know what the months are. But it seems perfectly plausible to think that if we have summer and winter rates for sewer, that a rate regime that reflected summer and winter rates for water might be able to address some of the equity issues that we looked at. Just looking at the multifamily dwellings as an example, if the student dorms are lumped in with the multifamily homes in the city, Those dorms are empty. They're not using water in the summertime. And so that doesn't seem like a like kind of consideration. So anyway, just as a thought, you've already made your recommendation to council. I just wonder whether there's another way of doing it and what the results would be in another world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anita Mitchell. I just have a short comment on the water rates. I agree with the concerns that Ed Fielmetti just stated. And I appreciate the fact that it is a confusing thing to explain. And I hope that you and council will make strong efforts to explain to the community. With respect to incentives for conserving water, I bow to the knowledge of a number of you on landscape management and plantings, and I would suggest that adding to the incentives that native plants will use a lot less water. They have known to have deep roots, and encouraging people to do that will have additional environmental benefits for wildlife, potentially for reduced use of pesticides. It'll help our pollinators, and there'll be a great cascading effect. So regardless of what happens with the water plan, I hope you'll encourage that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
David DePrice, yes, thank you for trying to encourage conservation from commercial buildings, because residential customers have conserved about 60% at a better rate than commercial buildings. And I am concerned that with these rate changes, it's going to even get a bigger spread there. And commercial uses about 2.5 times more water than our overall residential customers. Secondly, sort of on a different point, I would love when our various commissions are considering resolutions that they be part of the agenda that you can look on Legistar, because the public doesn't know what you're going to do. They may want to come down and make a comment about a resolution that you are considering, and things are brought on the table, and they may be very well considered and thoughtful resolutions, but you're not giving the community an opportunity to at least say what they think about those. That's my comment. Thank you.
Any other comment? In that case, if there's no further business to come before the commission, the meeting will adjourn.
Hold on.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed you again.
Well, Councilmember Smith and I had received, we've been receiving emails from residents, and I'll make this brief because I know you're still trying to catch the basketball game, but, train noise, airplane noise, and most recently, Michael Flynn wrote in about excessive noise from handheld garden tools, particularly contractors' use. So we were wondering if there could be a subcommittee of the Environmental Committee established to look into these noise complaints, particularly he mentions the two-stroke gasoline and oil-fueled engines that power hedge trimmers, weed whippers, sidewalk edgers, and leaf blowers. And he would like for it to be targeted particularly at contractors, which I understand is not able to do. You can't target contractors over residents. But, and he's suggesting battery-powered tools instead.
I think to kind of cut it, what Commissioner Bannister is asking is to form a subcommittee to study regulations on the use of outdoor gas-powered lawn and landscape equipment.
Okay.
Don't we already have an ordinance, a noise ordinance? Sundays?
We do have a noise ordinance. I don't know all the details, but I do know.
Yeah, I can't remember. Losing former council member Briere lost our body of knowledge on that particular topic, as I believe she was the subcommittee that looked at that before.
I believe you can't use those power tools on Sundays, and it's specific to commercial entities, as far as I know.
I can certainly bring back what I know from code and, work with, I think, my guess is police are the ones that would enforce that.
Right.
So I can find out what we have in code already and then,
I
we
think
can
then
bring
maybe,
it up at the next.
maybe the ask is just that you get back to Commissioner Bannister with, and to me with some language that discusses our current regulation, and that's a starting point, and then perhaps determine if we need to do more.
I can also take a look and see whether any of the sustainability folks in other cities have taken a different approach than what
There
we
may be
have.
best practice ordinances
Yep.
or something like
Right.
that address it.
I can do that.
Anything else?
One little tidbit, there was a group of us that came to the Board of Commissioners meeting last night, because if any of you had been following, the Road Commission had been chopping down a bunch of the champion trees and heritage trees. They had gotten a grant to remove fixed objects from along the side of the road. And so fortunately, that there was a big meeting, which you can all view on YouTube, where the road commissioner has stopped removing any further trees. Unfortunately, they did remove a lot of unfortunate, healthy 100, 200, maybe even 300-year-old trees. And so, in the upshoot of it all, they've asked, the commissioners asked for the city, for them to develop something similar to Ann Arbor's program for protecting our trees in the county.
Thank you for that update, too.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? Okay. Our next scheduled meeting is for April 26th, and I'm afraid that this is a meeting that I will miss. Now, if there's no further business to come before the commission, this meeting will adjourn at 9:19. Thank you very much, everybody, and thanks for being flexible with the